My name's Katie Anderson. I'm the Vice President for Public Housing Relations for Night Development, our new branding. So we'll go ahead and get kicked off. So we're talking about repositioning assets for commissioners. And I'm going to just be talking about some very basic information first, and then I've got some examples that I want to share and open it up for questions. So if I can figure out how to get to the next one. Yes. So repositioning your assets. So what is repositioning? I get that question on a routine basis. Everybody used to call everything RAD. And so they associated everything with the RAD process, but actually repositioning is far greater than RAD. So we're going to talk about it from a general sense today. So what is repositioning your assets? And of course, that's exactly what it is. It's putting your assets that you have control of, both your physical property, your staff, your financial capacity, your funding, your management, your operations, everything that's related to your business of affordable housing. It's literally putting that into a different position in your business plan. You know, what I like to say is that is a changing of your business model, both from the beginnings to the end of it. So it's both physical and management operations. So repositioning your assets changes the philosophy of how you're doing business for a large part. And so it is redeveloping your business model from a public platform into a private-based platform. It is literally redeveloping your properties so that they meet today's needs a whole lot better. And also you can meet the needs of your communities. There's going to be opportunity, we'll talk about in a few minutes, for increasing your portfolio, adding new units to it, redeveloping your property, all of those things. So a part of this redevelopment process is where you become a landlord. So it's becoming a landlord of those former public housing units instead of being the public housing agency. Now, if you're a public housing authority with an HCV program and you choose to use project-based vouchers in your redevelopment strategy, then you will still operate that HCV program as a public agency, because none of those responsibilities change. But the actual management for your properties, you will literally become a landlord in that aspect. And so that's kind of a real broad statement there. But basically it changes your position related to the project from that of being the public housing agency to that of being the landlord and the owner, or in a position of the landlord and the owner. Sometimes you share that with other people, depending on what your strategy is, but you become a landlord instead of a public housing authority. And of course, that's providing more quality, affordable housing opportunities for your community. So that's what repositioning is all about, is changing the strategy in that part of your business. So you may ask the question, well, we know what it is, so why should I even do it? And even in today's time, as much training, information as we've had about repositioning, or RAD, repositioning, people still don't really understand sometimes why. Why should we even do this? And of course, a lot of people just automatically say, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to change. I don't want to do a lot of things. And of course, that's within their ability to choose. But why reposition your assets? So sometimes it's harder for some PHAs to understand why they would do it, because they may have had adequate funding in the past. Their properties may be in pretty good physical condition. Their financial operation may be pretty strong. Their net position may be really strong. And so they can't always see the why of why would we do that. They're comfortable where they are. But there are still a lot of whys out there, even if you're meeting all those things. So the typical ones, the typical first why is to address the backlog of your physical capital needs. Most housing authorities have been underfunded for many years. And so they are having a difficult time in just meeting the long-term physical needs of their property, much less even thinking about upgrading to today's standards. As we know, most public housing has been built many years ago, 50 plus years often. And so it's not always been brought up to today's standards. And so they don't have the capacity to do that with the funding that they have. So repositioning allows you to access that money to take care of some of the physical backlog of needs that you have. Also, one of the whys is stabilizing your funding. Part of the challenge that public housing authorities face today is the uncertainty about their funding. They don't know from one year to the next how much operating reserve or how much operating subsidy that they're going to be able to access, or capital funds, because it is contingent upon the federal budget and what gets allocated to them. So it's not at all about what they need. They often know what they need. And even in the formula driven world, they know what they're eligible for. But just because they're eligible for that doesn't mean at all that that's what they're going to receive. So it's typically a percentage of what you need that you receive. And you never know what that percentage is going to be until you've gone into your fiscal year, and often not until near the end of it, because you may get so much up front and then get some more back at the end of it. So that uncertainty of funding makes it very difficult for a public housing authority to plan. It makes it hard to determine what we're going to do staffing wise. I mean, we come out with a budget. Often it's based on last year's budget, and sometimes it's tweaked, depending on how we did with last year's budget. But the reality of making real true plans you cannot do, because your market and your funding is very, very much unstable. So repositioning your assets to where you become a landlord as opposed to a housing agency, you actually change your funding strategy, and it is much more stable. You know in advance what you plan for, you know what your HAPs are that you receive, and all of those things. So you're able to make some funding choices based on that. And the reality is, often, depending on the numbers of where you are now and what your future may be, you very often get additional funding. Your HAP becomes greater than what your actual capital needs are, or not your capital needs, but your capital funding, and your operating funding. So stabilizing that funding, going from the operating subsidy and capital funds to that of PBV or PBRA. So it's much more stable, as well as the fact, as a part of the repositioning, will allow you to access other types of fees that you don't have access to right now. If your PHA has chosen to do project-based vouchers, and you are the agency that are administering that, then you will have the capacity to earn administrative fees. But even in the repositioning strategy, there are other types of fees that you have the capacity to earn, depending on your partner relationship and what you negotiate. So there's developer fees, management fees, administrative fees. There's access to other types of money that you haven't had access to in the past. Then also, one of the whys, of course, is less HUD reporting and regulatory aspects. Now, there's by no means are you getting out of all of the HUD reporting or all of the HUD regulatory aspects, because there are several that are kept, especially related to residents. There are many protections for residents, and I would never try to tell you there weren't, because there are, and there needs to be. So you do have some aspects, but it is far less than you ever had as a public housing authority. So changing of some of those regulatory aspects. Another why that you would reposition is the diversity and the ability to increase your portfolio that I mentioned earlier. This is an opportunity for you basically to redevelop your properties. And that actually covers a lot of different territory, depending on your strategic need for your community and what your choices are. So at this point of redeveloping your property, you have the opportunity to add units into your portfolio. Very many PHAs, as they redevelop their public housing authority, are adding infill units through tax credits and some other ways that are out there. So they're increasing their portfolio by adding in these units, and thereby they increase their opportunities for their community for affordable housing, as well as strengthen their own programs by adding to that portfolio. You have the ability to redesign some obsolete units. A lot of our properties, as I said earlier, were built so long ago that the standards by which they were built really don't meet today's needs. And not only that, often our community at one point, maybe we needed 5 bedrooms, maybe we needed a ton of 4 bedrooms, but now by and large, our families that are accessing our waiting list, they need 2 bedrooms and not 3 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms or something of that nature. So as you redevelop your properties, this is an opportunity for you to look at some of the challenges that you have in renting your units and making sure that maybe you redesign them to meet the current needs that you have. That's part of your strategic plan. And I would just always encourage you, as you are looking at your strategic plan and making a decision about which tool in HUD's toolbox you want to use to reposition, that you make sure that if this is an issue for you, that is in the conversation, because that won't be something per se that your partners will automatically know. It will be something that you and your staff have to bring up, or the housing authority staff. And then, of course, a part of diversifying is also the possible relocation of the units, the geographical location. This opportunity allows you to transfer assistance. So if you have a complex, an apartment complex, maybe that's just in really, really bad shape and sometimes it needs to be demolished and taken down. Sometimes it just needs to be abandoned and moved into a different location of town. So there's an opportunity for what's called transition of assistance. Now, that is not something that is taken really lightly because it's quite expensive to do sometimes, but it is an option that's available to you as you reposition. Otherwise, you would not have that opportunity. And then, of course, there's the opportunity for rebranding, redesigning, or refocusing your business. So as you reposition your assets, as you move into a different type of business allocation that you have, or a business plan, business model, then there's an opportunity for you to rebrand your organization. Opportunities for change, opportunities for improvement in customer services, in community partnerships, in just actual services of the property. So there's a lot of opportunity that comes with this repositioning or the redevelopment. It also provides for long-term flexibility and creativity to your long-term problems. So some of the problems that we've been dealing with for many years in public housing authorities that we actually had no resolution for, we just had to continue making the best of the situation that we have. Repositioning, redeveloping is an opportunity for you to take a new and fresh look at those problems and try to get some resolution to them. For one thing, you kind of change your hats from the public agency to a landlord, and so you begin to view some of those issues in a different way. What something may be challenging to us as a public housing agency might actually be a benefit as a landlord. And so you can look at some of those issues and take a new approach to them and maybe even change that process. But basically, the way that you redevelop and you reposition puts local control much more into the driver's seat of your properties. The things that make sense for you in a local community, this is your chance to have those things looked at closely and to look at some solutions for some of those long-term problems. So we talked about the why, and we've talked about the what first and then the why. And now let's talk for a few minutes about the when. So we've got a little bit of idea of what repositioning is. And more than likely, if you've been attending training anywhere in the country in the last couple of years, you've probably heard a lot about repositioning. And maybe it made sense to you, maybe it did not, depending on the section that you were at. But one of the things that you have to understand about repositioning and when the time is that, first of all, when do you reposition, or when do I approach it, is at this time, it is still voluntary. So repositioning, redeveloping, approaching HUD's RAD process, whatever you want to call it, whatever terminology or language that makes sense to you, it is still voluntary at this time. If you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard me say that I don't think it will always be voluntary. I think that there will be some assessment from a higher level at some point that says that we need to make more economical choices. And part of this repositioning is being allowed because economically it's in the best interest of both HUD and the agencies for the most part. And so I think you'll see that kind of change, but for the time being, it is still voluntary. So there's no hard and fast rule about I have to do this before the end of 2020, or I have to do it or think about it. My opportunity leaves me at the end of 2021. There are no hard and fast deadlines on that. It is still very much a voluntary process. Now, your local field offices often are talking to your executive directors, and they're encouraging it for a variety of reasons, in all honesty. But there is still no hard and fast deadline. So your time could be now, it could be tomorrow, or it could be never. You could choose never to approach this process. That is entirely up to you. But I would tell you that with all the advantages that there are out there for housing authorities, it behooves you, and it's a smart move for you as a board member to be thinking about this in a very responsible manner, to seriously consider a repositioning strategy. You know, as you look to the long term, because one of your responsibilities as a board commissioner is to make plans for the housing authority for the future of the affordable units that is under your umbrella, as well as for the future of affordable housing in your community overall. That's part of your job, part of your role at the housing authority. So it makes sense for you to consider this as part of your long-term strategic goals. And hopefully you have been able to do that already, and likely you probably have. But I would just tell you that now is the time to look at that if you have not, because money is getting shorter and shorter all the time. The supply is getting shorter while the needs are growing greater. As properties get older, they take on more physical needs. As costs arise, there's more cost associated with managing an older property. And so costs are consistently going up while money and funding is consistently going down. Now, we've been very fortunate at the public housing authorities for the last couple of years that they have been funded pretty well. And that means a couple of different things. For one thing, it means that if you choose RAD as one of your tools in the toolbox for repositioning, then the RAD rents are actually higher than they were when the program first started. So that's good. That's a good thing, because the longer they go up and raise, then if that's the choice you make in your strategic repositioning, then that means there's more money coming in for the authority. So now is a good time because the RAD rents are pretty high. You know, so take advantage of that tool if that's the tool that you want to use. HUD has also built in some other tools that actually are helpful to housing authorities that give them more money to look at on the HAP side, which as an owner, of course, that's the payment you'll be receiving. And so they've taken to doing some what they call a blend of Section 18 and RAD. And so what that does is it takes 75% of the RAD rents, which are typically lower than the fair market rents, and it couples them or bundles them with 25% of the fair market rents. And so that basically gives more money into the developments that they can earn, and it makes it much more financially solvent and financially feasible. So there's several different things that are out there that has been allowed for housing authorities to access that has really made it more financially feasible for housing authorities. So it's a good time to look at those tools. So there's plenty of time still to get in on the RAD cap. There is still a number associated out there, but it looks like it'll be a long time before that cap is ever met. So there's plenty of things that are out there that encourage you as a housing authority to look at repositioning now. Of course, the brand new RAD revision number 4 rule is out there. It does have included in it the HOTMA changes that are very much conducive to making a repositioning change at your agency. So if you're not familiar with that, or your director hasn't mentioned that, and likely if you're looking at repositioning right now, they probably have, because it's the latest rule, and you always have to follow that. You know, so I tell you that this is a good time to look at repositioning. It's a strong opportunity and a strong time. So I would also mention that this process is not a short process. It does take time for a lot of different things. You know, one of the most important things that your agency will do is to develop a strategic plan at the onset of looking at this, because you have got to have an idea of what we want to, where we want to go and where we want to end up on the end of this project. And so you have to have a strategic plan, and then you start looking at the tools that fit in with your strategic plan to give you the best and highest use for your property. It's important that you have the capacity to earn as much money as you can. Now, this does not affect residents because this is a HAP. Residents still pay rent based on their portion, and they're still treated in all the same manner that they are pretty much at the housing authority. They have lots of protections and lots of good opportunities that are built into the RAD process. So there's things out there that protect them, but you should be looking at the best and highest use of your properties, what makes the best sense. So it's important to understand that this process is not short. It's kind of a longer term before you get there. So it's best to go ahead and get started looking at options if you're interested at all, so that you can get these underway, because it's going to take you just a minute to get this done. So what do you do first? If you've decided that, yes, we're interested in repositioning, we're interested in RAD, we're interested in some of the other tools that are out there. Of course, some of those tools that you've probably seen in the past are the actual RAD program, the Section 18, which is the demo dispo aspect, as well as the RAD Section 8 blend. And then, of course, there's the Section 18 for small PHAs. And those are all a little bit different processes that are in place, and they apply based on what your strategic plan is and how you want to look at that. So what do you do first? If you said, okay, it looks like this repositioning stuff is something we want to do, something that looks like it's beneficial for us. So what do I do first? Okay, my agency and I as a board member have said, yes, we want to look at this. What do we have to do first? Well, the thing that I would tell you that is most critical for you to do first is to educate yourself about the position of your agency. Because one of the things that I've seen with commissioners often is they jump into this process not really even understanding what their own needs are, much less what the process is. Now, it's true that the executive director and the staff are going to guide you through this process, and they're actually going to do the majority of it. But as a board member, you are responsible for what happens at this agency. So you should know something about it. So educate yourself on the position of the agency itself. What are our physical needs? Have you seen a physical needs assessment? Has one been done? We call those a PNA, physical needs assessment. Do we have little things, or, are some of our systems in bad shape and need to be replaced? Is our plumbing old and outdated and falling to pieces, and so we need to do some serious system renovation? Or are we really in pretty good shape and we just need to bring it up to today's standards? And housing authorities are all different. A lot of it has to do with when they were built, the choices that they made at that time, how well they've been able to maintain them, or how good property management they've had in place. There's a lot of things that impact the current physical aspects of your agency. So know what your physical needs are. Understand those. Get a report about them. Have a conversation about them. Understand what your staffing capacity is. One of the things that happens is as you redevelop and reposition your agency, it affects your staff. A part of it has to do with the choices that you make as a part of the strategic plan, but part of it has also to do with the changing of your funding structures. And if you're redeveloping and you're going after certain types of funding, then those fundings often carry responsibilities with them that your staff is going to have to carry out. And are they capable of that? And you need to know that going in, because a lot of that has an impact on the partner that you choose, or the management company that you choose to work with, or whether or not you're fully capable now of managing under that funding structure. So you've got to know that. What's our staffing capacity? What is our financial capacity, and what are our needs? Do we have a lot of reserves that we can build into the physical needs of this property? Do we have no money that we can make available? Do we have money to use that we're either going to have to put in the property or we're going to lose it? Because once you convert, you can't keep HUD money, old public housing money. It can go into the property, depending on what it was, but you can keep it. So once you change that business model, there are certain implications there that you have to know about. Then, of course, what is our overall operating or management capacity and the need? How good have we been doing in the past in leasing? Have we done a good job with our staff, or is our staff always challenged in getting our units leased up? And what is that all about? Why is that? So you have to know the position of your agency, what the needs are, what you can do, and what direction you're heading in. And then, of course, I would say you need to educate yourself on the process. You need to understand how you access funding. What funding is this? I find that a lot of board members don't realize that some of their agency money is going to go into this project, because they don't understand how that works. And they don't understand that once you do a final full portfolio conversion, you can't have public housing money anymore. That has to be spent in the property. So there's some things you need to know about accessing the funding. Make sure you understand that and educate yourself. I'm certainly not saying that you should do the executive director's jobs, by no means. And not only that, you don't want to spend all your time and effort learning those kind of things, but you should understand the general sense about the new funding that you're accessing, and your director should know that very well. So those are some of the questions you want to ask as a part of your strategic planning process. So you need to educate yourself on the timeline. You need to understand that there is a process for applying for money. There's a process for closing a project. There's a process for construction if you're redeveloping the physical aspect. And then, of course, there's stabilization and lease up. All of those things fit into your timeline. Understand that information. You need to understand a little bit about how relocation works, because your property, if it's occupied, which hopefully you are occupied to a great benefit, then relocation may come into play, and you need to understand how that affects your families, because anything that affects residents, board members often see that first. They get the questions from the community, they get the questions from the residents directly. So understand a little bit about that relocation process. And then, of course, understand and educate yourself on what the final outcome of your business model will be. One of the things that I've seen happen is that people get surprised at the end of their project because they didn't realize what the business model was going to be when they ended up. And so they're not always prepared for that. So I would tell you that you should discuss that. You should ask those questions at the end of the day. When this project is finished, what will our property look like? What will my role be as a board member? What will a housing authority's role be? Who is going to manage the property? Will that be us as a housing authority? Will that be some other third-party management? What is it, and what is going to be done at that point? So know that information and ask those questions. So that's a little bit about repositioning and the what, why, and when. And so it's an important and critical aspect of our business and our future plans. So it is important for us to understand it and to talk about it and have conversations as we approach that. One of the things I'm going to talk about really just kind of quick that I thought would be of interest to commissioners at this point would be, because we've been talking about RAD now for several years. And so there's a lot of information going around it, kind of the good, the bad, the ugly. Some of it's correct. Some of it makes it appear a lot rosier than it is. And then some of it is just not even correct. It's a myth about what happens. So I have some slides in here that I actually stole from a HUD presentation that was at the end of 2019 when we were back still giving live presentations, that talks about the myths of the RAD process. And so often people say, well, one of the main reasons they say, well, I'm just not even interested, I don't want to do it, is because they heard that it probably wouldn't work for them for a variety of reasons. So this is a comparison that HUD did, and it's actually up on their website, but it talks about, I have heard that it doesn't work for everyone. And so these are some of the stats that are out there. And as you can see from some of these charts, that a lot of people say that the PHA size really matters, that it works better for small, works better for large, works better for medium, whatever, whatever that they've been discussing. But you can see here that the majority of large PHAs that have RAD inventory now are 47%. The medium size is 38%. And then, of course, the small PHA is still the lowest at 15%. And then, of course, it shows what the PH inventory is right now. And there's still quite a few units in that large PHA because they cover the majority of units. They don't cover the number of actual agencies. The medium to small has the most agencies, but the most units fall under those large inventories that are there. You can see there is people of all sizes that are working in the RAD program. Then, of course, you have a geography area that shows that the Northeast, the West, the South, and the Midwest, and you can see from here that at this particular time, the West and the Midwest is probably the lacking areas. And so the Northeast and the South, which is kind of interesting, have been leading with making these RAD conversions. A lot of it has to do with the field offices that are out there and their views, as well as training and education that's available from their state chapters. You know, when there's a lot of training available, then of course there's interest in that, you know, so that shows some of the areas there. And then of course the comparison of the published RAD rents relative to the fair market rent. The RAD rents are about 71%, you know, of what the public housing rents are right at the moment. And so what that means is that RAD rents, which basically your RAD rent is set on your public housing and your CFP, your operating subsidy from public housing, and then what your CFP allocation is. And so the RAD rents are pretty good for most areas, you know. So, and one of the things about RAD rents, if that's the tool you choose, is they are given an OCAF adjustment automatically every year. So whatever percentage of an increase you may have gotten on operating subsidy, you will get that on an OCAF adjustment as well. Then of course, the inventory that is out there, 89% RAD, public housing 77%, and across the USA, 85% is affordable, of that affordable housing in the urban versus the rural. So these are some of the myths. So another myth is that RAD is only for high investment transactions like tax credits. While it is true that 42% of transactions involve significant capital fund work, in other words, they had to pursue LIHTC to be able to make that transaction work. You know, so 42% of that, but also $25,000 per unit up to new construction. And then of course, 57% involve more modest capital investments, often paired with that capital fund that I talked about, your PHA money that is there for reserves for future works. So 40% of the transactions involve either 4% LIHTC, low income housing tax credits, or 9%. So there's a lot of PHAs that are looking at alternate funding, you know, so of course everybody would love to have 9% tax credits. It yields the highest dollar back and the higher investment, but they're competitive and they're very difficult to get in the market. 4% are non-competitive, but there is a ceiling cap at every state. So even though it's not competitive, it's not an endless supply as well. But there are other types of funding that people are looking at. And very often there is their own funding that they've been building up within their own budget that is going into the redevelopment process as well. So those are some of the myths. The PHA will lose control of the property. Of course, in 60% of the transactions that don't use LIHTC, all of those or almost all of those are owned by the PHA directly or wholly owned by their subsidiary or their nonprofit. So the LIHTC transactions do create a need or requirement to restructure the ownership simply because of the way the LIHTC program works. But if a PHA is not choosing to do great renovations, they don't have a need for those, or they are keeping them at a lower cost and accessing some different types of funding, then those properties can still fully remain as PHA owned or owned by their nonprofit, whichever way works best for them. And there are different ways to do that. So those LIHTCs, the PHA is typically the general partner, the GP, are a part owner, and then someone else is a GP. So it really depends on the structure of your development partner, if you have one, and who's taking the risk for those LIHTC credits that are out there. So it's a lot more involved than that. I'm just speaking in a very general sense. But so there is some change in ownership that can be very frightening for a PHA. So educate yourself about that and don't let it turn you off one way or the other, but understand what that responsibility is. So RAD does require a level of public or nonprofit ownership or control. In other words, the RAD program will not allow you to sell your property off to a for-profit business, whoever that is. It is required to maintain that affordability, and it must be owned by a public entity or a nonprofit entity. You know, so those private partners can come in there and have part ownership, but there is still a requirement for the housing authority to remain in the ownership structure. And most often the housing authority is going to get back that property after the tax credit time period has expired. Just really depends on what some of the structure is, on how that actually works. So RAD is a privatization program, is one of the myths that are out there. So any decision or any aspect to look at adding and involving private parties is a local one. And so in other words, HUD doesn't require it to move to a privatized base. You can get out of the public housing world and still be a housing authority. And you can convert without doing any renovations if your property is in good enough standards, and you can become a landlord. So you're no longer owning public housing, but you still own affordable housing. The problem has to deal with being able to meet your long-term needs. And because people have been so underfunded for so many years, very often they have no option but to do some of those changes that are needed. So privatizing is a local choice, and it's mostly about funding more than anything. And then of course, RAD doesn't ensure the ongoing affordability of the property. That's absolutely not true, because they are subject to perpetual affordability requirements. If you go PBV, project-based vouchers, or if you go PBRA, the project-based rental assistance, you will be tied into the affordability structure. And of course, there is no change in the population that we're serving. We are still assisting the hardest to serve that are out there. We're still assisting the same poverty level that we have always assisted. Is just the way the housing authority receives their money on the backside of it is a little bit different. So those are some of the myths about RAD. And so I wanted to just give you some success stories now that we've talked about some myths out there. And these happen to be some of our partnerships that we have available. And this first one that I'll just show you is from Bogalusa, Louisiana, which Bogalusa Housing Authority has completed a full portfolio conversion. They have done it in 3 different stages, and part of that is to access the proper funding. And so this happened to be their first phase, which they call Pine Trace Homes. As you can see at the bottom on the left is a picture of the property to begin with. On the right is a picture of the property now. There was not a substantial amount of exterior changes. So most of their changes were interior, but there were site changes, there were management changes, there were some other things that were built into there. And so that, as you can see, this particular property had a funding of $13 million that they received as a part of their budget. Part of that came from the Housing Authority, and part of it came from low-income housing tax credit partnerships that are out there. So these are some of the financial information is on the left there, and you can see in this particular phase of the Housing Authority, it was 92 units. They did use those 4% LIHTC properties. In one of their phases, actually the 3rd phase, they came back and inserted in some brand new LIHTC units as a part of that. So they ended up with an additional, I think it's 35 or 36 units that they added to their portfolio in that phase number 3. But this happens to be the first phase that they went into. So very successful. That's one of our clients. And then of course, another one that I'll just show you is with the Alexandria, Louisiana Housing Authority. Both of these properties have been fully constructed. All their redevelopment has been done. They have been stabilized. And so that means they met their leasing criteria and they're being managed. Both of them, well, the Bogalusa is actually being fully managed by a third-party management company. The Alexandria Housing Authority, and this particular one is the Harmony Gardens Estates. They actually are in a partnership management where the former Housing Authority staff works alongside of a third-party management company. And the plan is after it stabilizes and gets a couple of years of management experience under their belt, then the Housing Authority will go back to fully managing this property on their own. As you can see, this particular property had 172 units. They had several different sites. You can see the before and after shots that are there in your pictures. There was a $23.8 million renovation process that was there. And so their sources were both 4% tax credits as well as Housing Authority money that was built into the project. So it's important to understand that there are projects of all sizes. The first one was 92 in that phase. This phase was 172. And they had a total of 4 different phases at Alexandria. And we actually are working on their very last portfolio. It's in construction now. And so once it is finished and its construction and leased up, they will no longer have, well, they actually have no longer have public housing units, because as soon as the project closes, it comes out of public housing. You know, so they've done a full portfolio conversion as well in Alexandria, but they do still have one project that is finishing up in construction and will be in the leasing stage in the coming months. They also added in some brand new units as a part of their conversion process. So their community had a need and they added units back into it. So these are some of the success stories that we have had in particular. And just a little bit about our company. Is that we have had over $900 million that we have leveraged in 4 years. We're a relatively new company that we've been able to leverage on behalf of our partners. And of course, we have 49 partnerships right now with 65 different housing authorities. So, so a lot of things have, a lot of activity has happened with our company in the past couple of years. And RAD is still going very strong. There's a lot of places that haven't even looked at RAD. You know, as the country changes, as the financial market changes, of course, all these things affect that repositioning strategy that people are looking at. But I wanted to just share, I was asked to share some information with you guys today. And so that is asset repositioning. And so I would be happy to answer any questions or talk to you a little bit more about anything you're interested in. So I don't know, David, if you have any questions. If you do, just speak out and I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay. Katie, thank you very much. That is really good presentation. If I was a board member, I would be convinced, right?
So you aren't even a board member. I've been talking to you like a board member.
Hey, that's okay, because
so now you can talk to your board.
Exactly, yes. And I did download your presentation, so I
Good.
have it on my heart right now. And yes, we have our board that is, I'm going to say maybe half are very familiar, because they've been serving on the board for a few years, few major terms. But we do have the other half that are novice, and some of them don't ask questions. They just, you know how it is sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Learn or try and grab as much as you can.
Sure. I absolutely understand.
And my own personal issue is that we're having a mayoral race here, or election here pretty soon, and so our board may change. And when that occurs, well, here we go all over again. You know what I mean?
Yes. So, yeah, that's very unfortunate. Local politics always comes into play somehow or the other, doesn't it?
Yes. At this point, the San Benito Housing Authority, we were fortunate to obtain a 9% tax credit.
That's great.
We're working with Housing Solutions Alliance. I believe they're out of Shreveport.
Yes, I'm very familiar with them. Yes.
Okay. Micah Strange.
Yes. Okay. I know Micah really well.
Okay, and Art Schultz, I believe.
Art Schultz. Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, okay. They're good guys. Yeah. So.
Yes. So we're converting our first public housing units or community into RAD. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we will be able to close November, but
that's
I don't
great.
know. It's so close. Anyways, but
yeah, it's challenging. The development business is challenging. Yeah, it's always. I tell people it's that hurry up and wait. I mean, you get everything done, go 90 miles an hour, and then you get to stop and wait for something, whatever that is. So
that's true, and with our required resident meetings, and I can't get everybody in one place or in one room at one time.
With COVID, right?
Correct. So it's been a challenge, especially with
Have you guys used have y'all used the virtual meetings for your that aspect of the new notice that came out that allows you to have virtual meetings and stuff of
That
that
would be
nature?
great.
Mhm.
Right, that would be great. However, this community is comprised of
Yeah,
elderly residents. So,
exactly.
I mean, some of them I know have phones, but that's about the
Yeah,
extent of it, right?
exactly,
So,
exactly.
yeah, so it's a little tough, but
Yeah,
we're still doing
working
it.
on it,
And,
and that's really about all you can do is try do your best to get that information out. I know the new notice that just came out not too long ago, I think it was in the middle of September maybe, that talked about the virtual meetings again and just kind of putting back out there the information related to COVID. And that's one of the things it talked about is doing your best to over communicate, but it
yeah,
gets really hard, especially when you serve a population that like elderly, or even sometimes it's rural, where they just don't have the same access, so all you can do is do your best to do what you can, for sure. But it sounds like you guys, like you have a good partner and you're working hard to meet all those conditions, so that's really great to hear. That's great to hear. But I do know Micah very well and know Art very well, and of course I managed public housing in Louisiana, for almost 30 years. And so I'm very familiar with them. So they'll do, they'll do a good job for you for sure. But if you ever have any questions that I can assist you with, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can, and you can definitely tell Micah and Art I said hello. They will
okay.
recognize who I am as well. But it sounds like you got it going. You're just in your hurry up and wait stage, and hopefully you'll get that closing in. I know all developers, just so you know, very often they'll set a closing date and then it'll get delayed, and then they'll set a closing date and it'll get delayed. That's a part of the process, unfortunately. It's just other things that impact it, So, but it'll get there eventually for you, and I think you'll find that that's been a good choice for you. And you are very fortunate if you got 9% credits, because it's highly competitive. So that's a great thing to know for
Yes.
sure.
Now,
So
I noticed on your two examples that you obtained 4% and some
yes,
bonds.
yes, we
That's
did.
probably what we'll be looking at for our other two
Right,
remaining public housing communities. So
right.
I'll certainly probably give you a phone call and
Sure,
ask you some questions
absolutely.
when we get at that point. And I appreciate your help on that.
Absolutely. Anything that you have. I don't know if my presentation has my email. I just thought about the fact that I didn't list my email there, but Hattie and her group have my email. And our website at the company will still have it has my email on there as well. So just shoot me an email if you have any questions, or give me a call. I'll be happy to do my best to answer them. So I'm excited, about y'all's process, and happy to help in whatever way that I can. So,
Okay.
so thanks for
Thank you.
joining us today, though, and I
Yes,
appreciate your
thank you.
time.